Hello, this is Naji Coach. In this episode, we're going to cover the human design. Those are the basic relationships that make us all similar despite our vast differences and all the variables that make us special and unique. But there is something underlining that makes us all similar, and that's a secret to knowing the math of souls and being able to relate to all humans. So, let's get started. Today we'll be doing an overview of the 16 Mojo configurations. In order to get the most out of this, you should have a few concepts, a few terminologies down already from the Human Psyche Design 101. So I'll go over those real fast just to set the scene. If these aren't something you're familiar with, you'll need to watch that video and assimilate that material, maybe talk in the forums until you get it, and that will make the Mojos you're going to hear about now make more sense. So what are those concepts? Okay, well, left side of the brain is directive, structured, right side, adaptive, freeform. From the brain, oriented towards the objective, back here, oriented towards the subjective. Make sense? Okay, we also have, what else we cover? We have the discernment corridor, we have the perception corridor. Perceptions are taking information, discernments are making decisions on criteria. Within the perception corridor, there are the channels of literal, detailed-based perceptions and interpretive, pattern-based perception. And then in the discernment corridor, we have two channels there as well, the logic-based channel and the values-based channel. Other concepts that are important: the concept of momentum, the gaining of energy, the concept of modulation, the restricting of an energy, and the concept of perception modulation, the idea that everyone has two perception powers, one here and one here, and they modulate each other. Well, one more modulates the other, whichever is stronger. So everyone will have a perception here in the front right and a perception power in the back left, but one will be higher ranked than the other. In the discernment corridor, same thing. All humans have two powers of discernment. One is an objective discernment and one is a subjective discernment, but one will be higher ranked than the other. You have a ranking, which is that of the four powers, you have the source power, which is the first ranked, the tandem power, which is the second ranked, the offside, third ranked, and polar, which is the fourth ranked. In addition to that, there are four priorities of the psyche, which are the compass bearings, the stimulus register, the dynamics mover, and the worldview map. Going back to the modulations real quick, the minor modulation is whichever one. It can be discernment or perception, but it's the one that has the tandem, the second ranked power, being modulated by the offside third ranked power. And the major modulation is, again, it can be discernment or perception, but it will be the source, the first ranked power, being modulated by the polar fourth ranked power. Okay, so that's a good recap. Now we can start getting into some new exciting things. There's a concept that I will address here just very lightly, but I will get to more in another filming, and that is the concept of yin and yang. There are lots of ways to interpret that. We have our own particular interpretation of pod layer theory, but a few points that will be relevant now is that the left side of the brain is considered yang to the right side yin of adaptive. That's probably the first and most important of the yin-yang union of opposites. So that's what yin-yang is to my mind, is a union of opposites. Then you have, what else? Subjective and objective. In that context, the objective is the yang and the subjective is the yin. And now more relevant to what we're going to do today with the 16 Mojos overview is in the channels. Within the discernment channel, the logic-based powers are considered to be yang to the yin of the values-based powers. And then in the perception corridor, the interpretive powers are yin to the yang of the literal perception powers. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on that because I will devote a filming to that because it's an interesting concept that takes a lot to explain it. But I'll focus on those last two, the difference between the values and the logic being yin and yang, and also with the interpretive and literal. That relates to the choices. There's two choices in each of the quadrants. So I can touch my head here and say, nai or vai or whatever, and that's just sort of like a general way. But we're going to use a more formal way, a less casual way for right now to help highlight. And that is a closed hand or an open hand. So the closed hand will represent yang, and the open hand will represent yin. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started by talking about a Naiji, which is my mojo, and then I will just flow out the rest of the 15 from there. So as a Naiji, I use Nai back here to deal with subjectivity and perception, and also the priority of the worldview map. The tandem power is Ji, which is objective and discernment, and also deals with the dynamics mover priority. The Ji in a minor modulation relationship with Zai over here. And I'm using still my left arm on purpose so you see that this is kind of a metaphor for how we're able to read. This use of Zai will never look like this. It's important. This has, in a conceptual way, is right when I'm using it, even though I can use my Zai very well, it will always have a look of this if you know how to read the face. Okay, so the minor modulation is the Zai to the Ji, and that's also the discernment modulation, and then V. And that is the perception modulation with Nai, and also the major modulation. I'll now continue with the rest of the 15. You could also have Nai, which takes care of subjectivity and perception, but you could follow it up with Z. Z also takes care of objectivity and discernment, so now all four considerations are taken care of, and we have the worldview priority and the dynamics mover priority taken care of. Coming over here, they're going to have Jai. Jai is going to be their discernment modulation with Z, and also their minor modulation. And then they also have V. V is going to be their objective perception, and it's going to be their perception modulation with their source Nai, as well as their major modulation. Back here, there is another power that could be used. It could also be Vi. So there are Vi mojos. There are two of them. There are two of each of the powers. There are two mojos that use a power as their source. So we have Vi Ji, which is then going to come over here and use Zai as its minor modulation and discernment modulation, and then ending with Ni. Okay, so notice these combinations here. And that is the major modulation, also its perception modulation. The fourth of what we call the subjective perceivers is the Vi Z, who then modulates its V with its offside Jai, and then it modulates its source Nai with polar Ni. So those are the four subjective perceivers. We'll now go to the front left. These are the objective discerners, and there are four of them, two for each of the pod powers. We'll start with Ji, and you have Ji with Nai, and that is going to have a V for the offside power. So that's going to be their perception modulation and their minor modulation. And then back here, Zai. Zai will be their polar power, and it will be their major modulation to Ji, and it will be their discernment modulation as well. Next you have Ji and Vi, and then the Ji Vi is going to have the offside of the Ni. That's going to be the perception modulation and the minor modulation, and then finally it will also have, since it's we call it Ji alpha, Zai as its polar, and that will again be its discernment modulation and its major modulation. There are two more of the objective discerners, and these are the two that use Z. So that's a yang power, it's a logic-based power. So there is the Z Nai, and they're going to have a V power for their offside, and that is going to be their perception modulation and their minor modulation. And then they will actually have back here Jai. Jai will be their discernment modulation, Jai modulating Z, and it will also be their major modulation, their most difficult. So we've just done there the 8 mojos that are on the left side of the brain. They are all directive mojos. We'll now go over to the right side of the brain. there's going to be back here, Zhi. So you have the Zhi Ni, and the Zhi Ni is going to have for offside Vi. Vi is going to modulate their Ni, and that will be their perception modulation and their minor modulation. And then it'll go from Vi up here to Z. Z is their polar power, and that's going to be their major modulation and their discernment modulation, between that and their source of Zhi. There's another Zhi alpha, that is the Zhi V. The Zhi V is going to go Zhi to V, and then over here to Ni. Ni will be their offside power, and it will be the Ni to the V, that is their minor modulation and their perception modulation. And then it goes Zhi to V to Ni, and up to Z. It also ends in Z as a Zhi alpha, and that is their discernment modulation and their major modulation. There are two more subjective discerners. That's what the four Mojos that start back here are called. They're subjective discerners. There's also the Xi alpha. So there's the Xi Ni, and they modulate with offside Vi, and then they have a polar Xi, and that is their major modulation between the polar Xi and the source of Xi, and then their tandem, the tandem Ni, and the offside Vi, that is their minor modulation and their perception modulation. We also have the Xi V Mojo. This Mojo has Xi V, and then over here it has Ni and then Xi in that order. So it has the same four conscious powers as I do as an I Xi, except in a different order. For them, this is going to give them a discernment modulation over here of Xi with the Xi. The difference is for them, the Xi is first, and it is the Xi that is modulating the lead Xi. So in their relationship, the Xi is the lead discernment, and then the Xi, it comes in second, which also makes it the major modulation. So it's both the discernment modulation because it's in this corridor, but it's the major modulation because it is modulating the lead power for the Xi V. The Xi with the little G over there is going to modulate a lot. The Xi V have up here V as their primary perception, and then back here Ni is their secondary perception. So for them, they're going to have a minor modulation in this case because the V, although it's strong, it's not as strong as their Xi, and their Ni is correspondingly closer to it in relationship size. So the Ni modulating the V, it takes effort, but not as much as the major modulation. There are just four more Mojos, and those are the objective perceivers. The two powers up here are V and Ni. So we'll start with Ni. That is Ni with the Xi, and then it is going to modulate with first offside Z. That will modulate the Xi. That is the minor modulation and the discernment modulation for the Ni Xi, and then it will be the Ni to the Xi to the Z to Vi. And Vi will be their polar power. It is also going to be with Ni, their major modulation and their perception modulation. There is another Ni alpha, and that is the Ni Xi, and they use the Xi offside to modulate their Xi, that is their minor modulation and their discernment modulation. And then it goes from Ni to Xi to Xi, also to Vi. They end in Vi as well. So the polar Vi with the source Ni is also their perception modulation and their major modulation. We have just two Mojos left, and those are the V alpha. So we have the V Xi, and they are going to modulate with excuse me, offside Z, and then with polar Ni. So between the Xi, the tandem Xi, and the offside Z, that will be their minor modulation and their discernment modulation. And then with the source of V and the polar of Ni, that is their perception modulation and their major modulation. And just one left. and that is going to be the V Xi, and they're going to modulate with offside G. That is the discernent modulation for them, and also their minor modulation, and it'll be V Xi Ji Ni. And so their polar Ni, the fourth place Ni, will be with their V, their major modulation, and their perception modulation. I'm just going to highlight a few things before we sign off here. But something to note here, there are a lot of relationships. There's at least 20 of them we talk about in the social alchemy discipline within Mojo Dojo. But one that's of importance right now relating to Mojo reading is what we call Shades of Me. And Shades of Me is another Mojo that has the same 4 conscious powers. And just use this little physical metaphor right now, you can kind of begin to see why we're able to read them differently even though they're using the same 4 powers. So if a person uses the same 4 powers as you, that means that when their eyes go to the right, their eyes go to the left, when they're speaking, when they are suppressing their values-based expression, when they are drinking in information, all those things will actually be accessing the same parts of the brain as you. However, here's the difference. The way it plays in the face actually shows the layering, and the layering has a hierarchy to it. So to just give a visual representation of that, I will right now do a Shades of Me of myself, which is I am Ni, Ji, Xi, V. Those are my 4 powers. But you see how it came across. There's also Ji, Ni, V, Xi. Same 4 powers, but you saw the difference there, and that will play in the face. Those are both left brain, but they're different. One of them is subjective and one of them is objective. One of them is we call it a NES alpha, and interpretive first, and the other is a VES alpha, or values-based first. So same 4 powers, but there is significant difference, even though they are same 4 powers and on the same side of the brain. There are 2 Mojos over here, which are the Xi, V, Ni, Ji. Same 4 powers. This is a logic-based power, Mojo, and it's also a literal-based Mojo, which is very different than the 2 over here, but it has the same 4 powers. And then finally, also you have the V, Xi, Ji, Ni. Same 4 powers, but you see the difference now plays, and that's because those 4 Mojos start in 4 different quadrants. They start in 2 different sides of the brain. They start in 2 different front to back sides of the brain. So although they use the same powers, their brain is doing very different things in different ratios, and that shows in the face because their entire life has been playing that out. Every action they have, every thought they have, every movement of the face all comes from that layering. We often use the concept here of the 32 gender Mojos. That's because when you're going to read a person, there is both, in an artistic sense, there's a great deal of difference between males and females for physiological external reasons, and also, hormonal and other internal physiological reasons. There is that. But even deeper, there is a difference of the mind in that a female Naiji and a male Naiji are going to actually have a different wiring, in that although they both are on the left side of the brain and both actually are subjective and so forth, they have, one of them, the Naiji, is going to have, based on whatever sexual orientation is, the opposite sex, the opposite other, whatever is the most beautiful, inspiring, but not it, as the other side of the brain. It's very complex, we get to that more in peak pathways and so forth, but that will be different between the male and female versions of any Mojo. So when you go in the people pools, for example, when you train your lens and you start working with your own people pools, you want to have at least 32 categories to start putting people in because of those dramatic and significant differences. So I'm now going to just recap the 16 Mojo configurations, but highlight that there are 32 of them. So are you ready? You ready? Here we go. You have, when you're out and about, every person you see is going to be one of these following things. Are you ready? A male Naiji, or
female Naiji.
A male Nai-zi, or
A female Nai-zi.
A male Vi-ji, or
A female vi G.
a male vi Z, or
A female vi Z.
fun. Okay. You could also be meeting out there in the world. You can be meeting a G Ni male, or
A G Ni female.
you could also have a G Vi male, or
A G vi female.
good. You can have Z Ni males, or
Z Ni female.
Z Vi males, and
Z vi female.
over here we have Jai Ni males, and
Jai Ni females.
then you're going to have the Jai V males, and
Jai V female.
Zai Ni males.
Sorry, what? Zai Ni.
Zai Ni, good. And you're also going to have Zai V males.
And also Zai V females.
And then up here, last four, you're going to have the V Jai males,
And the V Jai female.
V Zai males,
And V Zai females.
and then you're going to have Ni Jai males.
And Ni Jai females, like me.
That's right. And then Ni Zai males.
And Ni Zai females.
And those are the 32 gender modules you'll be studying about here through the simplified method, the 5 years, and the people pool training that we do. And also solidification and quite a few other wonderful things. And it begins your understanding of the higher disciplines of social alchemy and peak pathways and so on. So get to it and enjoy. So those are the basics of human design. This lesson is one you're really going to want to focus a lot of your attention on and get to where you know it backwards and forwards, so you don't have to think of it too much. It should just be very natural and effortless for you. That's because just about everything else you're going to learn in pod layer theory, and therefore life, is going to stack on your awareness of how you work in universal principle, and thus how other humans work. For example, learning about your mojo will stack upon how all humans have the same universal design with different variables. So you're going to plug those variables in that make you unique, but within the human design that all humans share. Then you get a social alchemy, like relationships. This basically gets to how your particular human design relates with another human's or other multiple humans, their designs. If you don't know how designs work, that math will just, it'll go over your head. Spirit forms, again, when you get into spirit forms, you will take things in sort of an artistic, spiritual, reverie way sometimes. However, that doesn't change the fact that it's layered on top of this math. And if that math isn't solid, then things that happen in the spirit forming, which are very intense, it will confuse you and throw you because you don't have that basic foundational understanding.